Right, Philippa, over to you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all safe and well. I'm Philippa Dempster. I head up the retail team here at Freeths. And on behalf of Freeths, I'd like to welcome you to our second webinar, second in the series of the future of retail. A couple of months ago, we asked Insider Trends to prepare a report for us on how to mitigate the impact of this global crisis. And I'm delighted today to have Jack Stratten with us from Insider Trends, who's going to bring that report to life. Now, just before I hand over to Jack, I just wanted to let you know that we're very happy to take and would welcome actually questions from you throughout the presentation. There's a little question and answer button on the bar, so please do tap in your answers there, and we will then ask Jack to give us his wisdom on those. If we don't manage to answer all of the questions, then after the event we will make sure that we come back to you. So don't worry, we'll make sure that we come back and answer every point that you have. It's going to be Chatham House rules, but I'm not going to be naming the people that are giving me the questions. So don't worry, I won't be naming and shaming anybody that wants to ask anything that might be slightly tricky. But do please, it's your webinar. We're really keen to answer your questions. We will also be recording it, and after the event, we'll send the recording out to you. And if there's anything that hasn't been answered, as I say, we'll answer that at the same time. So without further ado, Jack, I'd like to welcome you to the floor, stroke screen, or whatever it is these days, to give us a little bit more of an insight into some of the background of your reports and what you'd like to share with us.
Thanks so much, Philippa. And yeah, thanks for introducing me, and thanks for having us on board to work on the report. It's a really interesting piece of work. And hello to everyone, and I hope you've had a chance to read the report or skim through it at least. But I'll be talking a little bit about some of the stuff I covered on there. But actually, I'd just like to go into a bit more detail on some of the specifics that we might have brought up in that report, and some interesting stuff that's been going on very recently in the world of retail. I'm a senior trends consultant in Insider Trends, so and we work with all kinds of sort of large retailers around the world. So as well as having lots of sort of general industry insights that we can share, I can also confidentially, of course, share with you some interesting things that some of the retail partners we're working with are doing, some of the things they're experiencing, not just in the UK, but globally, which I think is really important, actually seeing, for example, what's happening to retailers who might have opened their stores before we did, or who've been going on kind of different journeys. The first thing I should say actually is, well, a couple of things I want to say. Number one, if I use the word unprecedented too often, please, I don't know, put something on chat. I should have like a swear jar for that word, because that's what everyone's saying, aren't they? The situation is unprecedented. I need to find a different way of describing it, but it really is. The second thing I just wanted to say, kind of as a caveat, that although I'm going to tentatively in this session, and with hopefully some of your questions and my answers, gaze into the future of retail, I think there needs to be a caveat with any discussions that this has become, what I do for a living has become harder than it ever was because of what's happened in the last few months. Everything is more speculative. Retail has changed so much in the last few months, but even more importantly, customer behaviors are changing at a speed that we used to expect maybe every few years. Everything has changed so dramatically. And it's really, really hard to predict how much those behaviors are going to carry on. It's incredibly hard. And I'd really say beware of anyone in my industry who says that they can accurately predict that at the moment, because no one can. We can definitely come up with some ideas, and we can all help each other out. And that's incredibly important to share our insights and ideas. But at best, at the moment, these are educated guesses, and they have to be. But what I just wanted to mention, I suppose, in this intro before we get stuck into some questions, is just really around one key theme that I think all of this that we're going to be discussing kind of hinges on. And that is this, I'm not going to say unprecedented, never before seen, that'll do, never before seen online retail growth. Doesn't matter what country you look at, online sales, online engagements for retailers have obviously increased. Whether we're buying stuff, whether we're looking for entertainment, we're going online because we have to. That has been, I think, the biggest change. We mentioned in the report, a good example is in grocery. So I think Sainsburys increased the percentage of their online sales as a percentage of their overall sales by, I think, maybe 5%. And it had taken them something like 5 or 6 years to do that before. And they did this in the space of a couple of months. That's the sort of speed of change we're talking about. And that's changed everything. And I think really everything pivots on that. Massive online changes and growth is having a big influence. And if we're talking about physical retail, for me, I think what that is going to have big implications for in the future is what physical stores do in relation to online activity. So really we're talking about omnichannel. And I think there's lots of different stuff that I'm seeing in relation to this kind of this, I suppose we could call it a trend, but it's bigger than that, of massive online sales growth. Some really interesting things happening. Lots of retailers exploring different things as a result of massive online growth. So you will have seen a lot of this in the report, but there's a few things just in the last few weeks I've noticed that are really interesting. So for example, a lot of brands I've noticed going direct to customers by creating their own e-commerce channels incredibly quickly. I saw that Heinz, I don't know if anyone else saw this, Heinz have started selling kind of like packages for delivery of different food products. And they've completely bypassed supermarkets and they're doing thousands and thousands of orders. Now they built this site in a matter of weeks and suddenly Heinz have become a direct-to-consumer brand. And that's incredible. You think this is the kind of thing that a brand like Heinz would have been talking about for years. And they've just done it. They're just selling their products direct to customers. They've gone to, they found some logistic partners very quickly and they've done it. Other brands, of course, are just partnering with the ready-made logistics companies or the companies that can handle that. So Nestle have partnered with Deliveroo to deliver Nestle products direct to consumers, again, bypassing supermarkets, even bypassing the likes of Ocado. Then we've seen, Nestle did that. Pepsi are going direct to consumers. So lots of brands are kind of doing that, just bypassing stores, which I'm finding really interesting. I think a lot of brands are completely reassessing, therefore, how stores can be useful. I can tell you that we work with VF Group, who own lots of brands, including the likes of sort of Vans and North Face. We help them to plan a concept store that is going to be that has been built but is going to open later this year, which of course is under lots of different pressure as a result of COVID. It's a concept store in Milan, and it was pure experience, pure physical experience, that space. Now, obviously, over the last few months, suddenly they're panicking. They're trying to think, well, what can we do? And also, they've told us in Italy, there's been online sales growth that you can hardly imagine. E-commerce penetration in Italy has been really, really low in the past, below 5%. And early estimations show that that's more than doubled in the space of a couple of months. So suddenly lots of customers are online. And VF now are deciding that in that concept store that's about pure experience, they're going to be doing loads of digital stuff. And in fact, the main thing they're going to do is make it a click and collect store. That's going to be at the front of the store. There'll still be lots of experiences, but the thing that's going to draw customers in and the thing that they're going to focus on is click and collect. Now I'm seeing that all across the board. There's been some great stories, which I can share some links with you afterwards, but Target have been doing incredibly well by making their click and collect offers in America just unbelievably useful and kind of COVID smart. So they do all kinds of things, whether it's collecting at the front of the store, ways of collecting in the car park, virtual queuing, ways to do returns by dropping stuff off at the bins in the front of the store, even returns to locations in the car park outside the store. They're just being so smart about linking what customers are doing online with kind of offline convenience. And they're still actually getting decent footfall in the stores for that reason. That's going to be huge, clearly, click and collect, which among many UK brands is a big theme, maybe isn't all around the world, but everyone is going to be reassessing how they can do that more efficiently in light of what's happening. I think also brands are going to have to start thinking about how they can create experiences online now more. Online has always been about sales and efficiency, offline about experience. But so many more customers are online now that I think there has to be a bit of a crossover. So physical spaces have to learn from e-commerce, and they have to become more efficient. They have to learn from what e-commerce does really well. So, converting people quickly, making it fast, making it simple. But equally, e-commerce needs to learn from physical spaces, and they need to work together much better. We might discuss, hopefully during this session, but I think KPIs might need to be different in this world. I already know from sort of digital first brands. By that, I mean brands that are online brands first, and then maybe open up stores later. So brands like Gentle Monster or Glossier, When they open up physical stores, their KPIs are completely different because they do more of their sales online. So they don't really worry about footfall. They don't really worry about sales per square foot. It's purely about engagement. It's about whether they can turn that in-store visitor into an online customer or simply get that online customer to go to the store. They're looking at different KPIs because their retail worlds are different. So those traditional ones kind of gone out the window. I think, again, when we're thinking about online, appointment-based retail is a massive one. Brands like IKEA, so IKEA Planning Studios, we're already heading in this direction. Now in the future, I think we're going to see lots of those big IKEA stores probably shut from a commercial point of view and just become fulfillment centers, just places to kind of organize picking, packing and delivery. And then we'll see small urban stores where you have appointments, where you design your bathrooms, your kitchens and whatever. IKEA are already doing that. And they've announced that this is only going to make them do that more, because appointment-based retail is kind of more COVID safe. But actually, it's what a lot of customers want, that kind of high quality engagement, as opposed to just wandering around. And I think also we'll see new types of retail in the physical world. I think there'll be a growth potentially of unattended retail, which is really a buzzy term for more futuristic forms of vending machines. So actually just vending machines that are linked digitally to customers very smartly, maybe through apps. And of course, those machines can be almost anywhere. So it can bring physical retail close to customers. Also, they can be in stores, and that can be a really smart way of returning something or picking something up. And I think the other thing that I think I've really liked, there's lots of brands doing smart stuff with virtual queuing for their stores. I think that's an absolute no-brainer. There are many affordable ways of implementing it. You don't have to design your own system. There's many ready-made third-party systems out there who'd love to work with you, I'm sure. So ways of organizing virtual queuing, as they're actually doing an amazing job of that already in a test space. It's working really well. Getting customers to actually do things beyond that. So yes, you can get customers to kind of book their space, through the app, but why not get them to start engaging with you? Can't you maybe show them what stock's in the store? They could start to book things. They could book an appointment. They could book something to collect. They could book a fitting room. There could be all kinds of things you can do in advance. That's, yes, COVID safe, but actually I think the kind of thing customers were wanting before COVID anyway. It's just better service, better experience, faster, more personal. And the only other thing I think I just wanted to mention, I've seen a few brands doing it, but I love, is that stores are going to be quieter. In the future, we hope not, but we know the reality is that we have to accept stores are quieter and they're going to continue to be quieter, we can safely assume, for some time. What can we do? This is a big theme for me. What can you do with in-store staff that kind of adds value to what they do so we can get them back to work, but also linking to online, what could be done? And there's a brand, Hero, who are a third-party company who've done this with a few customers, but actually lots of brands are doing this themselves. John Lewis have done it. Curry's doing it. What they're doing, it's pretty simple. They're just getting in-store staff to answer customer messages from the website. So when a customer is on your website shopping around, they can punch in a question, and in-store staff can have the app on their phone and they can answer it. Better still, they could have a video call with the customer and actually maybe show them the item they're looking at online and have a real engagement. Hero do this with Heels, for example, the furniture store in London. And I know that Heels have seen a massive increase in conversion of online sales. And it's great because those in-store staff can just do it in really quiet periods. They can just go through their messages, call customers back, show them that lamp they've seen online, switch it on and off and play around with it and have a real kind of engagement with them without having to leave, their own home. I think that's a big one because that can be done very cheaply and affordably. It's such a great way of linking physical and digital in a useful way. So really, I just wanted to explore that. There's lots of other things. Some of that we touched on the report, and this is also stuff I've been reading about more recently, but it all relates to omnichannel. And for physical space, I think this is absolutely essential. Massive online growth because of COVID. That online growth is here to stay. A lot of these customers aren't just going to return to physical retail, and certainly not straight away anyway. A lot of them will have been buying online for the first time, realized how good it is, how easy it is. So what can you do in physical spaces to link, to make them want to come in the space, to make that space safe and useful? And I think thinking in a more omnichannel way, this is something we were talking about before COVID, but it's become even more important, of course, now. I think I can't emphasize enough how important that is from our point of view. So yeah, that's really what I kind of wanted to introduce. And maybe we'll touch on this, but none of this is to say that a lot of the stuff I would have been talking about before COVID, which, for example, I was talking a lot about the importance of making physical spaces kind of fun and providing great experiences. If customers can buy stuff online, physical space has to do something more, has to be fun, has to be engaging. I don't think that retailers should be completely binning all of that and making everything physical functional. I think, again, that's a real dangerous prediction to make. How do we not know that a vaccine comes along and people are having that within a year, and within 2 years people just want to get back? They want to turn back the clock and have those amazing physical experiences. We can't assume anything. So I definitely don't think it's a case of completely switching off a lot of the stuff that we were thinking about before. It's maybe finding a middle ground between doing some smart things, some quick wins digitally and physically, but keeping some of that experience stuff that may well, start to come back. Because I saw a lot of it firsthand. As recently as January, I was in New York for NRF in Showfields. I'll send you a link rather than getting into that store, but it's just an extraordinary department store in New York. And it really isn't anything like a store. It's more like a kind of retail theme park. It changes every month. It's absolutely amazing. And it was packed. It was so good. And there's something so brilliant happening there, but it is physical. And of course, COVID has shut it down. And a lot of people are saying, well, that Showfields concept doesn't work now. But I just think it's so dangerous to assume that. I really think the enthusiasm people had for that isn't going to disappear. And I think when it becomes safer, people are going to want those things again. And, that's my own opinion. I might be wrong, but I think it's dangerous to assume that it won't. So that's kind of my introductory waffle out the way. I'm going to try and cut down on the waffle a bit more and give you lots of direct answers to the questions that come in, or of course I can waffle more. That's I'm here for 40 to 50 minutes to do either. So yeah, if we have any questions, Philippa, I'm happy to start answering them.
Great, thank you. Oh, well, one of the first ones is around what's happening now on the ground, because as you rightly say, we were all doing online because there wasn't really a great deal more that we could do. Now that it's more relaxed and we can go into shops, what's the trends at the moment? I know it may be a bit brand specific, but how do you think it's going?
So I think probably most of us would have seen or even experienced firsthand in the UK, the initial response in high streets when everything first opened was good, especially in brands who don't do a lot online, I think it's fair to say. So we saw queues outside Primark, which made sense. Primark hadn't done anything online, and they were very pleased to see people queuing. There was a brief kind of bounce back, but you will have also have seen probably quite quickly after that footfall numbers went down again. And there was some people going in store, but people are still being pretty cautious around non-essential retail. Obviously, essential retailers and certainly supermarkets continuing to do well, whether they're selling physically or digitally. So yeah, it's kind of an initial. In the first week, I spoke to the British Retail Consortium last week, and they said first week was a great bounce back, and it's kind of dipped fairly consistently since then. However, I know reports came out yesterday or the day before that sales had gone up as we expected in May, and there's signs of things having improved in June as well. So there's some very cautious signs of sales going up, but again, people are saying most of those overall sales going up have been pushed by digital sales rather than physical sales. So overall on the ground, I would say people are still being very tentative. And in terms of what retailers are doing, I haven't seen anything personally hugely unexpected or innovative in the UK yet. Retailers seem to be doing what they have to do. They're having people queuing outside. They're making the spaces safe in all the ways we kind of mentioned in the report. They're kind of ticking all of their boxes. Is there any great innovation around that? I'm not sure. I think a few brands are working with virtual queuing. I personally think that's a massive one. I think that's vital, especially in high streets. I think once people can start using those for multiple shops, they could almost plan their shopping trip in advance and book their slots for each space. Then there's no physical queuing outside, and the spaces can be kept to a certain amount. I think retailers might need to work together to achieve that, but I think that could really work. I know that I was talking to someone in Copenhagen and also in Sweden, virtual queuing apps have been really popular actually, and they're doing really well. And they've said that's had a really dramatic effect on footfall. They've seen people really are booking their slots, and that's making them much more confident. Actually, part of their stress is queuing outside. In some of those big retail spaces, they're more comfortable walking in and around, but they don't like the idea of the queuing outside, which I think is partly a fear thing and partly reminds us that not that much has changed. We still hate queuing. So virtual queuing, I think, is a massive one. And a few brands are starting to do that. The only other thing I would say is I've seen a couple of big retailers, this would be the retailers who can afford to do it, are trying to find a fun side to some of this stuff. Is it working? Yeah, I'm not sure. Selfridges is the most obvious. So Selfridges have already announced they're doing things like trying to entertain people in queues, so they can have DJs outside, and they're going to do. They're doing lots of kind of fun and artistic stuff inside around COVID. So I think that's interesting. I'm glad that Selfridges are playing around. I think most brands around the world are always looking to Selfridges for innovation. At the same time, I don't think it will be something that is hugely influential yet, because I think as much as people love Selfridges, they haven't had a huge amount of footfall either. And I think that in some ways, Selfridges probably will start to also just do some practical things and push their click and collect offers and do a lot of that stuff as well. Because, basically when people aren't rushing to Selfridges for experiences, that people really aren't quite in the mindset for that kind of thing. So I think even though Selfridges have done that, I'm not sure we'll see loads of other brands doing the same thing. And that's kind of the UK, and I think the rest of the world, it's not all that different. And I think if you look to China and Asia, where high streets have been open a little longer and shopping malls have been open longer, there's been a slight and some positive footfall rises in certain parts of the world, but none of it's dramatic. And a lot of those online customers are continuing to buy online. A lot of the time because they came to it for the first time in February or March, and they realized it's good and it works. That doesn't mean that they've abandoned physical spaces, but it does mean that, physical spaces are going to have to work hard to win them back.
So what about face masks then? What sort of impact is that going to have? Is it going to mean people want to go, or is it going to mean people want to stay at home more? What are your thoughts around that, Jack?
Well, it's interesting because in the UK, certainly, it almost seems like it's dividing people on ideological grounds or something, or political. It's fascinating how opinionated people have become. But I think that, again, I think the face mask thing, I think there's room there for retailers to try and play around with it. I know for a fact that we have a partner agency in Paris, and they've said that in Paris, there's been a massive culture of premium brands like Chanel designing quite expensive face masks, really kind of like premium face masks. And actually they've had a really big uptake of those. And it's kind of, I think, maybe giving people a sense of pride, and people have quite enjoyed going out with their Chanel face mask or something like that. And I quite like that because that seemed to be a vaguely positive way of doing it. So maybe there's some potential for brands to brand those face masks or to find something interesting around them, or even if it's just in their advertising and their marketing, to play around with that and to look at the positive signs of it. Because I think there is a danger that some people will be put off by it. But evidently it's here to stay. So I think, retailers have a responsibility to do something positive with it rather than lament it.
And what about local high streets as opposed to the big malls? We've had a shift over recent years to the mall, large shopping centres, rather than, and at the expense of the high street. Do you think that might move back the other way?
I think there might. I think a lot of people would hope this. I think during COVID, there definitely has been a shift for obvious reasons to local high streets. There's been, in many cases, where stuff has been open. I think it's been a lifeline for people, and definitely some of that early footfall was happening at local high streets. So I remember people were saying that even in that first week when non-essential retail opened up around Oxford Street, actually the highest footfall was in areas around London. So those shoppers who live in places like Kingston or St Albans, they weren't necessarily commuting in to get excited and go to the flagships. They were just going to their local high streets. So for obvious reasons, for safety reasons, local high streets have had a bit of a bounce back. I think there's bigger reasons why that might continue. There's definitely been, for lots of reasons, that kind of hyper-local trend around food, but also retail. So people wanting to shop locally for sustainability reasons, lifestyle reasons. That's been happening for a long time anyway. Certainly among millennials, that's been a big trend, wanting to shop for things locally. I think as brands get better with their data, they can do that better as well. Because I think definitely we still have in countries all over the world, we have this problem of kind of really inefficient supply chains where maybe someone orders an item that's stored in a warehouse 200 miles away and it's delivered to them, and actually it turns out that item is in a shop on their high street. And there's some brands and companies doing fascinating things around that. Actually, I'll share with the attendees at the end. There's a company called Near Street, which is an app completely free that businesses can choose, or customers. And basically it just shows you not brands on your high street, but items. So if you look for a light bulb, you can just put light bulb and it will tell you the location of the nearest light bulb, whoever is stocking it. And Near Street have been really, really, really successful with smaller retailers, because all they do is take a tiny percentage of the sale of that product. So it just says a light bulb is in this shop in your local high street. You can tap here to reserve it, and then you just walk to that shop and pay for it and collect it. So there's simple things happening like that already, which I think are great for smaller high streets. COVID has exaggerated it. I think it could continue, but again, I think maybe it will just be more of a balancing rather than a dramatic shift, because I also think shopping malls, out of town retail, I still think it will continue to be popular because it remains so convenient. And when we're talking about click and collect, it's so efficient for people living in a lot of UK. It's just cheaper and easier for them to reserve an item with their favorite fashion retailer, go to the retail park, pick it up, grab a drive-through coffee or whatever and go home. That is a very easy, convenient experience. And I would imagine that will continue too. So maybe just more of a balancing rather than a shift.
So do you think there's signs of more people shopping locally then when they can't buy goods online, rather than going into a large city like London?
There's been, so I can't remember the exact stats around this, but the BRC, the British Retail Consortium, did a report, I think in June, and they said there was some evidence to suggest, yes, that was happening. So local high streets were seeing a bounce in sales, but again, I think it would have been heavily around those retailers who had a digital presence, who were able to, so for example, coffee shops, FMCG businesses and whatever, who were an essential retailers who were able to offer a takeaway or click and collect or delivery option. I think there's definitely been evidence of that. I think probably some of the smaller retailers who don't have that digital presence might still have struggled. And maybe food and drink businesses as well, who don't, who weren't able to sort of pivot their business easily into doing something different and doing something COVID safe. But from my understanding, there's definitely been some improved activity with local high streets. And I do think that will continue. I think if people are going to physical stores for certainly the foreseeable future, with COVID still around, I really think, people are going to be doing that in their local high streets, of course, rather than big cities where they're commuting to less, because of course they're not going to their offices as much and they're not, doing those other things necessarily that have them going into physical shops.
And what about data during this period? We all know how important it is, particularly finding out what customers like and don't like. Have you got any examples of companies that have really used data very well at the moment, and what are they doing with it?
Yeah, so there's lots of interesting examples. Actually, someone I mentioned at the beginning, Heinz, they said that they did this direct-to-consumer website that they've done. It's really interesting. They were asked about it because they've done loads of sales through it, and lots of supermarkets and food brands panicked because they just see that as another way of something eating away from their sales. And they asked Heinz kind of why they were doing it, and they said it was purely for data reasons. They built that platform because they wanted a way of being able to control data collection, because they know through that website, every time a customer buys something, they're gaining a piece of information that they don't get when they sell that tin of baked beans through Tesco. So they can actually work out, the demographic and the sort of customer type, and start to build profiles. So that those thousands of sales they've done, that gives them information that from their point of view is so much more useful and valuable than maybe the millions of sales they do through supermarkets where they don't get data. So this direct to customer trend that is also happening among non-food businesses, I think a lot of that is actually driven by data too, because brands are recognizing, if I can own that relationship, if that transaction can be just between me, the product owner, and the buyer, then I get all the information. And if data is the new oil or whatever, as I can't remember who said famously, then obviously data is incredibly valuable. So why are we not owning that relationship? So I think that's happening a lot more. The other thing, when I was talking about brands like Hero, and there are loads of different, what you might call these kind of omnichannel agencies. So they, in lots of different ways, they kind of tackle this issue of trying to link online and offline in interesting ways. Again, lots of those agencies say, while the sort of frontline benefit is sales, the real benefit is data, because every single time that happens, rather than a customer going into your store and doing all kinds of things, and maybe buying some stuff, but leaving, and you don't really have too much information about their journey, they say whenever that journey's online, or whenever it's captured in store because they've already been connected with us digitally, we have that information about every single purchase. And, Hero kind of work on this basis that actually a customer who they know digitally rather than just physically is worth many times more than a kind of physical only customer. That's what they kind of believe. So that's really interesting. And the other point I would say, and we'll see what happens when everything opens up again, in a kind of more, in a kind of en masse, but is Amazon Go in New York. I went to in January, and it was really interesting because I chatted with them, and those stores. So for anyone who doesn't know, they're just, Amazon Go is a completely kind of cashier-free experience. You go in through an app, you put a couple of things in your basket, and then you walk out again, and the app is scanned and it sees what items you put in your basket, and you walk out of the store. There's no interaction with staff members at all. In many ways, quite a COVID-safe concept, actually, because you can book your visit in advance and whatever. But what was interesting is, again, they said all of those stores, and there's like 11 of them now in New York, and they're growing quite quickly. Amazon Go said all of that, and the same with their different store formats they have in New York, is that every single store they're opening is purely about data. It's customer research. They don't care what they sell. It's purely to find out more about their customer, but it's all captured digitally. Nothing that happens in any of their stores isn't captured digitally, not just through the app, but they have heat mapping cameras and all kinds of stuff. It's not wise for the retail world to follow everything Amazon does. But my theory is that when Amazon are doing something, a lot of very intelligent people behind the scenes have decided that's the best thing to do. So I always think whatever Amazon are doing, it's pretty wise to take note. And that's that's the kind of feedback we got on their stores. Well, even when they're doing something physically, so forget about their website, physically, it's all about data. How can we capture information when a customer walks in store with what they do? That's what the Amazon Go concept is all about. It's not really about selling stuff. It's about capturing data.
And what about Walmart? Because I think they've been doing some interesting things with data, haven't they? Looking at how they might change their stores.
Yes. So, and interestingly, I think a lot of they're sharing a lot of their insights with Asda. Obviously, they own Asda. And so we'll start to see some of what Walmart do in the UK, which is quite exciting. Walmart have a store in New York, actually, which is the best example of what they're doing. And they, there's lots of different aspects to it, but fundamentally it's all about data capture. But what they're doing, which I really like, and I think this is something that needs to be addressed, particularly with in-store data capture. If I'm talking about heat mapping or anything like that, I think rightly anyone on this webinar is already thinking, well, are customers happy with that? Are they okay being scanned? Are they comfortable with everything they buy being tracked? I think a lot of us instinctively are still uncomfortable with stuff like that, and for good reason. And I think Europeans, generally speaking, are less comfortable with invasions of data privacy than Americans are. That seems to be the pattern. And certainly in Asia, like in China, sadly, customers don't have the choice. But in Walmart, what they're doing, which I love and is really important, is they've got all kinds of interaction in the store and lots of staff employed purely to talk about data. So talk about what with customers, why are we capturing data all around this store? What is AI? What is artificial intelligence? What is big data? All this scary stuff that you hear about all the time. Walmart are saying, how can we actually talk about it to customers, break it down, make it less scary, and explain why it's actually useful? So, i.e., we're collecting your data, but not to invade your privacy, but to make sure that every time you come in, your experience gets better and better. Or that when we send you an email, that we send products that we know you're going to love. That's what they're focusing all of their energy on, almost making data less scary. And I think that's really important, because when we talk about data, too many brands seem to forget about the customer and the fact that customers still feel, for the most part, very uneasy about that word, let alone what it actually means when they walk into a store or whatever. And that's important around COVID, because don't forget, with track and trace happening and everything, all of a sudden we're entering a new world of how our data is handed over. And a lot of retailers I've read are getting excited, thinking, well, that could mean people are more comfortable with handing over their data. And again, these are dangerous assumptions to make about customers. I can only speak from my own experience. I'm not comfortable with it at all still. And I work in the business of working with techie brands who are obsessed with this stuff. And I know, just as a customer, I'm not that happy with a camera in a store tracking what I'm doing, so that information can be used to, target an advert to me or something. I'm not comfortable with that. So huge work, I think, needs to be done about making data collection friendly and more human.
I've got a different question this time from the audience, more about property. and long-term effects on leases. Do you think this will stop the year-on-year upward long-term property leases and perhaps be more turnover driven?
I think that it has to be honest, because I think that the one thing I think from the thing that I know the most about, that I've learned through this period, is that the way that leases work and the way that retailers are charged and looked after by their landlords, we've recognised that definitely it needs to become more flexible, and there needs to be ways, I think, of retailers being able to have more room for adapting. So the classic example at the moment has been lots of physical stores have wanted to become what everyone's calling dark stores. So in other words, places that can just be used to fulfill online orders. So that shop suddenly becomes, so imagine if Primark had done it, suddenly all that stock is available online, and instead of a customer facing thing, it can just be logistics staff working there packing for deliveries. Seems like a no-brainer and would work really well. We'd keep staff in work, would boost sales. But of course, because of certain complications with leases and other things, that hasn't been possible. That's just one example, but I think the way that this relationship works and the length of leases and all different things, I think it's clear from this period that the future there has to be probably a more flexible relationship, and probably a closer, more collaborative relationship, because clearly COVID has shown that we all need to work together more on this. For retail is to survive. That's the responsibility of everyone, from the consumer right up to the landlords, from absolutely everyone connected with the retail industry, including the government. Everyone has to play their part. So we just have to have the outcome that best protects the future of the high street. We have to. That's my view. And I do think the government will gradually move towards pushing that more, simply because they have to. We've seen that they've budged on VAT for hospitality. I think that will happen for retail soon enough, because they're going to see soon that high street retail need more. They need more help. So I think we'll see that VAT reduction coming for retail as well, but that's another story.
Another question from the audience: will retailers need to adjust their staffing ratios in store to be more flexible, as customers seem to want to shop less in store now?
I think, regrettably, I think in the short term, absolutely. And I think we have to, it's a horrible and very hard topic to even discuss, let alone plan for. But I suppose we have to think about the greater good and protecting the future of these brands, and the future of, to some extent, these buildings, these communities, these high streets. So those difficult decisions have to happen. So I think in some cases, if it's to help a retailer survive, yes, that has to happen. But the other point I would make is that hopefully, if retailers make the right the decisions from the top to keep pushing online sales, to do that better, to improve their supply chains, try and grow online sales, then trying to actually make the store support those online sales more, then hopefully that will bring some employment opportunities too. Again, I draw attention to what I mentioned earlier about Hero and John Lewis and Curry's, how they're starting to play around with these kind of virtual in-store assistants. Makeup brands are doing that a lot as well. In-store makeup staff offering kind of virtual makeup appointments, basically Skype calls with people to show them how to put on certain types of makeup. And I think stuff like that is a great way of giving those in-store staff something valuable to use. So I think that's the other issue, though, is that retailers are going to have to look at the value of those online engagements that maybe those store staff make. But again, to go back to the question, I think absolutely there's going to have to be a slight reduction, but just maybe some creative thinking about how staff are used if online sales are going to grow. And if more investment is going into Omnichannel, how can that be used to look after in-store staff as well?
Thank you. I think we've got time for a couple more questions. Probably the next one then is footfall going to be one of the most important measures in the future, or do you think it'll be replaced by something else?
I don't think it will be replaced. I think what we'll see is just more KPIs. I'm not sure about the people on this webinar, but a lot of the retailers we work with have talked consistently about two KPIs in the mix: footfall and sales per square foot. Time and time again, we hear that in the plans of launching new stores or existing stores. And when we spoke to a couple of people who worked on the launch of Glossier's physical store in Covent Garden. So Glossier, I'm sure you'll know about them, but basically a $1 billion makeup brand who until recently didn't have any physical spaces. They're basically a brand built on social media. They're extraordinary. Their products aren't, in my opinion, even that good. It's a brand built on brand, built on the idea of targeting a certain type of customers and absolutely nailing the messaging and how to reach those people. Now, Glossier, when we spoke to them about their physical store, when they opened it in Covent Garden, which, by the way, did record sales and footfall, it was the busiest shop in London pre-COVID. You couldn't get in there. And I do encourage you in the future, when things are safer, to go there in Covent Garden, because it's fascinating space. The thing about them is when I spoke to their KPIs as a much newer brand, they had about 15. And footfall was in the mix, but it wasn't the most crucial one. They were talking about things like the amount of online engagements they get from a store visit. So if someone goes in the store, do they actually follow them on social media afterwards? So they have all kinds of clever ways about being able to track that. Their ability to get those online social media people into the store. The dwell time was a big one. They would also assess things like staff happiness, because they actually think that how happy the staff are will have an effect on how customers and what they do in their behavior in store. So actually they said, well, that's a KPI then. So they had all these different KPIs in the mix, and footfall was just one of them. And that's not to say footfall didn't matter to them. It absolutely did. But I think that would be the big change, is that I'm hoping brands will in the future have many more KPIs and see a mix. Because of course, if we're going to be in this world where there's a mix of digital and offline, then you need more of a mix of KPIs. And of course, the great thing about online is it's so much easier to capture information. So it's learning again, and it's the big theme everyone's talking about. How can physical spaces learn from what's happening online? What can they learn from that space?
So before COVID, several legacy retailers employed non-retail directors. Think John Lewis with Sharon White, House of Fraser, Alex Williamson. So what type of skills and background experiences do you think non-essential retailers need now to help lead and respond to the new market challenges?
Well, if I look at some of the most successful kind of new brands, if we talk about some of the newest brands, and that's good because they're brands obviously who have been really COVID safe, because they've been very digital, they've attracted millennials, they have a big social following. So if you think about brands that have that thing that legacy brands normally don't have. So if we're talking about brands maybe like Sweaty Betty, we could talk about Lululemon are a great example as well. Definitely Glossier again. Peloton actually are a brilliant example of this. They do have physical spaces. What ties together those brands, and Peloton maybe is the best example of all of them. Peloton are worth something like $5 billion. And they don't really even, and they're not really even selling a product. So people think that what they're selling is a retail product, an exercise bike, but you don't pay $2,000 for an exercise bike. You're not buying that. What you're buying is the possibility of, when you're on your bike, you're cycling with thousands of others all around the world in some amazing bike race. Or David Beckham somewhere on the other side of the world cycling when you're on there. You're buying into a club. That's what you're doing. And that's why you're spending $2,000 rather than $100 like you normally would for an old-fashioned exercise bike. There's so much to learn from that for me with Peloton, because then, what kind of people do they have? How was Peloton built? And I can tell you, they were not. They're direct. I don't even know who they were, the people who founded it particularly, but almost certainly they were techie guys. They were people with really, really good tech skills, without wanting to, kind of generalize too much. They were definitely a people with a good understanding of what millennials do and how they behave. I think they were people with strong digital skills and understanding, strong technology skills. And yes, they would have had a retail awareness, but I almost think first and foremost, it was the tech and the digital skills that were most important, and their understanding of that world. Because in those examples that I just gave, and the same with Glossier, what's built those brands. And the other thing, actually, Glossier would be a good example. The other thing is not just tech and digital, but would be people with a really great understanding of and skills of creative marketing, branding. I could see a lot of directors being pulled from the advertising world in the future. I think that could be significant, because a lot of these stories, again, are victories of branding, getting their brand out there, that carrying so strongly across social and across digital, that then you bring that army of followers with you. And it doesn't matter where you are. You can be online, social media, physical store, they'll come. This is the thing that you'll see with Glossier. Glossier open up a pop-up, and they've opened up lots of them, and they turn up. Goop, I don't know if anyone knows Goop, the Gwyneth Paltrow online brand. That's just started out as basically a weird newsletter from her kitchen. She's now opening up physical stores. And I went to the one in Westbourne Grove in West London. It was really busy, but all the people there were just people. They were just these online followers. They weren't casual shoppers. there were people who just love the Goop online brand. And that's the point. Once you've got those people, it's like, they're not customers, they're fans of the brand. They're not customers. I think that's the big thing to take, their fans. And I think therefore the kind of people you want in your business to drive that forward, they're people who understand building a following, building a community, you know, building a cult almost, if I'm totally honest. They're the people you want. And that is a different skill set, because we're not talking about the niche expertise of how retail works. We're talking about, well, how do millennials behave, and how can we make them love our brand and hate everyone else? That's really what you're talking about. That's a very different type of person. That's techie, digital, advertising, creative, you know, that kind of person. You know, sadly, sometimes those people are quite annoying as well, I should say, but unfortunately they are very, very, very useful.
A final question then from the audience is, some of the European countries in particular, and maybe even China actually, are further ahead than us in terms of the recovery, dare I say it. Are there any particular lessons you think that we can learn from that we ought to be starting to implement now?
I'd say, so yeah, there's a few simple things. I think definitely in China and Hong Kong, where there's been success, from what I've read, the retailers, physical retailers that have actually done best there have been the ones that maybe have imposed more, what you might say, a kind of more draconian and heavy-handed in-store COVID-19 safety measures. So they're actually the stores that have been doing things like temperature checks, having those machines that check your temperature as you go in. Actually, I've seen some evidence that those stores have had really good footfall. So the point being, customers actually have been liking that extra level of something, because their belief then is that, well, when I'm in that store, no one else has got it. I know that because there's that extra step that's been taken. So I think there's something in that potentially. Maybe, I don't think that's a long-term thing, but certainly in the short term, if it's affordable, really showing that you're going the extra mile to make your space really, really safe is very good. And also, I should point out, safe for employees as well. So I heard from Sweden that there's a lot of there's been early signs that brands that have so like the UK, I think even though Sweden never went into lockdown, there's been lots of retailers who have lost staff. And there's been I saw this really interesting report. There's been this suggestion that in Sweden, brands who've managed to keep all of their employees, maybe by not paying out dividends to shareholders and things like that, the ones that maybe have made a loss to keep their staff versus the ones who've got rid of a lot of staff, have actually seen increased sales and footfall and a lot of love for that kind of protection of employees. Maybe that's partly to do with Scandinavia and the people. Maybe that it could be more of a regional thing. I don't know, but I found that interesting. And I do think customers these days, they really do care about how you treat employees. So I do think that stuff will be remembered. You know, I've already heard about how, for example, I know Wetherspoons have been heavily criticised for how they treated their staff, and they haven't had this amazing swashbuckling reopening that they expected. They think a lot of customers have been angry with them because they've heard that staff were furloughed, despite, you know, the owner having plenty enough money to look after them. So I think there'll be those kinds of trends are important. And the other final point would be that in Sweden, obviously, where the lockdown hasn't happened, that has been pretty much the only economy that I know of that actually has grown slightly over the last few months, whilst everything has stayed open, which was really interesting. The only one had like a very small percentage of growth, but growth nonetheless. So worth looking at what's happening now. But what's interesting is that they didn't just carry on regardless. The retailers have taken COVID safety measures really, really seriously. In fact, in many cases, much more seriously than in places like New York and London, where shops are reopening after lockdown. Sweden were very, very serious about those safety measures from the beginning, and it had an impact on how people behaved, which of course they think has kept infection rates down. But I think it's worth pointing out that as well, that in Sweden, that real commitment to being extra cautious, but also telling customers what you're doing, and that you're so passionate about their safety, and that seems to be having a good effect. So I think they're obvious points, but so far evidence suggests that does or can have a positive impact.
Great, thank you. I don't know whether it's possible, but I'd like to, if possible, to bring Sarah Griggs in here from our retail team, because of the interest in the property side of things. I'm just interested to know what she's been seeing. If that's possible to do, if you could give us an overview, Sarah, and then we'll probably just finish up with one final question for Jack. I think you're going to have to unmute yourself, actually. Sorry.
Apologies. Hi, everyone. So I think I caught most of Philippa's question, which was really from a property perspective, how I see things changing going forward. And I think I can really just reinforce what Jack was saying in that, in my view, I think we'll see a shift in the rents, certainly going towards more turnover-only rents, shifting the balance between landlords and tenants and sharing the risk in circumstances like we're seeing at the moment. So I think we're going to certainly see challenges whilst the market adjusts, but going forward, I think we'll definitely see a move towards more turnover-only leases rather than the traditional open market rent with upwards-only reviews. I also think that retailers will be looking at flexibility in their leases in terms of user to make sure that they can add in, as Jack was saying, the experience side of shopping into their traditional user clauses and how they use those spaces in crisis scenarios like we're seeing at the moment. I also think that potentially more retailers will be looking at potentially sharing space with other occupiers to, again, alleviate some of the pain in them solely being responsible for the rent. So it's certainly interesting times for everyone at the moment, but they're the key changes that I think we'll see from a property side in the next few months.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for answering the question I've just thrown out to you without actually knowing that you're going to be able to come on, so thank you for that. And Jack, I just wanted to say a massive thank you from Freeths and all of the audience today. Thank you for your report. Thank you for all those insights. Love retail, so fascinated by what's happening around the world and what we can do to keep making sure our retail is ahead of the game as far as we can now, because we really need to get money back into the high streets, into the shops, and people keeping their jobs. You know, we've got a serious job to do, and retail's a big part in morale as well as keeping the economy going. So thank you for those insights. There were a few extra questions that we haven't had time for, so apologies for that, but we will come back to you. We will also make sure that we provide you with the recording of this and also with the report in case you haven't seen it. We are looking to Jack and his team to do a follow-up report for us, and once we have that, we'll be circulating that too, and then looking at some more of the lessons learned from the last few months. I'm not going to use the word you suggested, Jack, but it certainly has been a very difficult time for everybody. But I hope you've all enjoyed today. Stay safe, and thank you for joining us. Thanks.